Hello. Let me get started. I know it was short notice to let everyone know I was doing this tonight, but just wanted to keep pushing this thing forward to wrap it up. So, two major things I'm going to cover tonight are masking, specifically with Silly Putty, and then I'm going to be applying the yellow base coat to my tiger stripe Wolverine. So his torso and his legs, and I think that's it. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first is masking. Normally, um, I tend to stick with Silly Putty. I first saw this being used. Another YouTube guy called Vince Vell Customs. He customizes statues, and he uses this stuff quite a bit. You can use other things like masking tape. I also use, where is it? This stuff here, liquid masking film. So I only use this stuff. This is basically, you can either brush it on or spray it on if you dilute it quite a bit. The only time I ever use this stuff is when I need to like really coat the whole figure and then possibly like carve in some smaller details. So I use this on my hazmat figure that had the very thin lines. I use this on my Warpath figure when I had to carve in kind of the red blade looking pieces on his costume. But this stuff is kind of for more intricate stuff, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to get the process done. So I found that Silly Putty is kind of the best all around, especially if you have good sculpt to work around. So this is the base body. I've already done his arms, and they still need some work. I gotta clean them up, but for the sake of keeping this thing moving forward, I just wanted to get the yellow base paint down and show you guys how that's done. So for the Silly Putty, there's nothing, no trick to it or anything. You just kind of cover up the areas you want. Don't have to be particularly clean about it. And then I usually just use my silicone sculpting tools and then just kind of wedge it into the spots I need. I've used this little can, and again, this is just Silly Putty. This is straight out of the egg. There's nothing special about it. It's not like a hobby craft Silly Putty or anything like that. It's just your regular old Silly Putty. But it tends to stick to the figure just enough, but it's not going to stick to the point that it's going to take your paint off or anything. So I'm just trying to wedge it in to all the cracks. All I'm really trying to do is cover up those arms so I don't paint his shoulders yellow. And this stuff works great around, certain details in musculature. Because if I were to try to use masking tape, say I wanted to like do a stripe across his back, and I wanted to just take some masking tape and lay that over there, I'd have to be really careful to try to fold that masking tape into each one of these little crevices, which would obviously be a real pain in the ass. So with this stuff, you just kind of lay it on, and you can create your line. So that's good on that side. I'm not going to mask his stripes, even though they're a separate color. Those are obviously a darker color. So even if I spray over those in yellow, it's not going to be a big deal to then cover that up with blue. And then also, just kind of a rule of thumb when I'm doing all this, the base coats and the masking, is the way I kind of choose which color I start with is based on the sculpt. So the lowest point of the sculpt is the color I'll brush first. So in this case, I wouldn't want to airbrush all the blue first and then come back in with the yellow, because then I'd have to mask off every bit of the blue. And then it's also easier to mask. It's much easier to try to get Silly Putty up against this sculpt than it is to try to lay the sculpt over the top and then airbrush around it. I am going to turn on my little fan station thing here tonight, so it may get a little loud. The last time I did it without it and I had a big headache, so I don't want to do that again. All right, so that's all I needed to do for that. And then I'll show you really quick, I did the same thing for the brown suit. So obviously painted the whole thing orange, and then just masked off the areas so that I can cover all that in brown. So again, you can push the Silly Putty right up to the sculpt. So to do that with masking tape or anything else would be real tricky. This works really well. All right, so I'm gonna get started on the paint. I talked about this a little bit last time. Yellow is a real bitch to paint. It's much easier to airbrush than it is to hand brush, just because you can get much thinner, cleaner coats quicker. But if you're ever hand brushing yellow, kind of same rule of thumb for everything, you're just going to need about 8 more coats. Just thin your paint down appropriately, and then brush it on a lot of thin, even coats. You don't want to try to glob it on there. Hi, Paul. You're the only one again. Short notice tonight, so I didn't expect a lot of people on, but thanks, dude. So I just went over masking with the Silly Putty. I got my mask on now. That's why my voice may sound a little crazy. Went over masking with the Silly Putty. I'm going to try to fix his lighting so you guys can see a little better, but this is going to light up, so that'll be a little better for you too. So now I'm going to start on the yellow paint. For this, I'm using, this is just my Tamiya paint. This is orange, obviously. I like to put it in these little dropper bottles because it's much easier to get into the airbrush. And I've already pre-thinned this a little bit, so I don't have to add a bunch of stuff to the mixture while I'm doing it. I have used the model color, the Vallejo. For whatever reason, I don't know if I'm not thinning them right or if I just got some older paints. These tend to clog up my airbrush quite a bit. So if I mix them outside or I mix them inside the cup, over time it builds up and clogs it up. So I prefer the Tamiya. So I'm gonna turn this on. If it gets too loud, let me know. So I'm not too worried that this is going to be a really bright yellow at first, but I'm not too worried about that just yet because I'm going to go over this and shadow it and add highlights and all that kind of stuff too. So that first coat, you always want to do it just a nice thin dusting. You're not trying to get the full final coat on there in one go. You just want to get the paint to kind of stick. Let it dry a little bit. Don't overdo it. There's the head. Some of that priming that I did last time, will create some of that shadowing, but kind of like I said last time too, I don't I try not to rely on that too much because I don't really like a dark gray shadow to my yellows. I'd rather have some orange tones and some lighter yellows. Yeah, I've seen pictures of that new Spider-Man figure. It's probably not one I'll pick up, but it looks cool. I need a toothpick. So obviously this is a way too bright yellow, but it's going to serve as a nice base coat for everything else. And I do see a little blemish. Yeah, it does. Little tiny blemish there, so I'm going to try to take care of that now before I get the full thing done. Sometimes little specks of paint or clay or who knows what build up on there. This is honestly the most frustrating part of customizing. Moving joints and trying to fix all these little imperfections. And most people might not care, but I'm super anal about this kind of stuff. Sorry, I'm doing this all off camera. I'm trying to get up here. So now Obviously I gotta fix this big black splotch on his chest. And rather than trying to go over that over and over again with yellow to try to cover it up, I'm just going to hit it with a little white, kind of just like I'm priming it again. And I always like to just hit this with the finest sandpaper I have to make sure that you're not going to see that. See the blemish through the paint. Like you'll see the, undulation of it if you're not. Looks like I'm making it worse, but I'm just smoothing out all the edges. All right, back to painting. See if I get a slightly better angle. So this is just flat white, still Tamiya. Back to my yellow. Still a couple small blemishes that I'll have to just fix later. So after that first coat, you can start to get a little heavier with it. The paint's gonna stick better second time around. Alright, so I had to add some shadows. And just darken this up a bit. Rather than going in with like a black or a wash or something like that, all I'm going to do is add a tiny bit of red to my yellow. Again, this is still Tamiya flat red. It was written on there. It's not anymore. And that's going to give it a little bit of a dark yellow look, if you're careful. So if you look at like the old Marvel Universe Wolverine, they used like an orange wash, which for whatever reason it looked like total shit because it looks real chalky. It's not smooth at all. But with this, you can, with the airbrush, you can be a lot more gradual with it. So I'll play around with this a bit. I'm just going to go with one drop of red to see how that looks. And I have a drop of flow, drop of thinner, 2. Mix that up. You can't really see that. You want to kind of come up at it too and leave the brightest yellow for the top of the sculpt. You can tell, sorry, that's hard to see, but it's looking a lot better. God, I wish the lighting wasn't so shitty. That's looking pretty good. That's only after 2 coats, so some nice highlights, a little bit of low lights. I'm liking how that's looking. See, the back still has a lot of that primer under it, so I'll probably just need to hit that a little more highlights, a little more low lights to give a more vibrant yellows and oranges. Just as a comparison, you can see that how much better that one's looking already. So I'm just gonna go back over everything one more time. It's gonna darken up that orange a little bit. Don't worry if like you go too heavy on it, because you can always just go back over with the lighter color or darker color or whatever you need to do to regain that layering. I think what I'll do now is add a bit more yellow. And I'll do 2 drops of red this time. A little thinner. So this is going to be way too dark. This would probably be okay for the brown suit Wolverine. And that's more the color I went with on this guy. But what I want to do is really hit these shadows. I'm going to intentionally make it a little darker than I want. I'll show you why in a second. So just like when I was priming, the angle matters. So since this is the darkest color, I want to have the most, almost parallel to the figure, just to really hit those shadows. And obviously, I'm gonna have to bend this torso again to get the underside and everything. I'm not doing a lot. This is all really subtle. Around the knees. I try to just get right underneath the kneecap, the bottom of the quads, and then into that crotch area, because that area is going to need to be in a little bit of a shadow. And the butt too. Alright, so I'll clean this out. Basically just running the Windex and rubbing alcohol fluid through it. Scrub out the cup. Doesn't have to be perfectly clean right now. I'm just going to add more paint, but I don't want to mess it up. Alright, so now I'm going to go back to my yellow, just straight yellow. And I'm kind of gonna do like a overlayer, overcoat. And that's gonna soften some of these areas that just are a little too dark. You don't want to overdo it because then you'll just erase all those shadows altogether. Yeah, I play games. I don't play Minecraft though. I'm a little too old for Minecraft. In fact, after this, I'm gonna go play Destiny because it's faction rally week, and I gotta grind for some tokens. Yep. Got a little bit of splatter on here. If you catch the, if you ever get any, if you ever get too much buildup on the tip, sometimes that'll just spray off of the front and leave little paint blobs on there. That's no good. All right, so you can see it's kind of softening up those shadows just a little bit, but not totally eliminating them. And depending on the color, you know, I'll do this multiple times to just get some highs and lows and highs and lows until it kind of settles where I want it. And sometimes after I totally assemble the figure, I'll see a spot there where the fade, you know, the shadows don't transition well, so then I'll mask some areas off and then go after it again. So I'm just going to compare this with this one real quick. It's a little deceiving because this area is lighter because I didn't hit it as well. So I may get this with a little more yellow, but I'm liking that tone. So there's a better example of the orange, darker orange, and the yellow. So now the last step that I do is seal this. And I don't seal it with the lacquer just yet. I wait for everything to fully cure. But what I do hit it with is, it used to be called Future Floor Polish. It's a Pledge product. I can't remember what the hell it's called now. I have a whole jug of it and I just put it in this little bottle. But basically it's a clear acrylic. It's like a floor wax, basically. But it's really just a clear acrylic. Now, what you have to factor in with this, it seals the figure really well. It's not going to make the thing bulletproof or prevent paint rub if there's paint rub. But it also adds a gloss to the figure. So I'll hit it with this. You'll see it'll deepen all the tones, kind of bring out the color. But it will leave a gloss coat on it. So then I'll come back the next day with Model Masters lusterless flat or semi-gloss, depending on the final thing I want. But this really kind of brings out those colors. It does protect the figure. And you don't have to worry. You can always paint over this stuff because it's really just like a paint. It's very thin. Comes out real easy. And I'll do this on every single step. You don't want to put this stuff on heavy because since it is so runny, it'll pool up and start to drip all over your figure. But yeah, that's it. After I do that, like I said, I'll wait for that to fully cure. I'll hit it with the lusterless flat if I want it flat, or the semi-gloss, or if I'm doing like a Venom or something, I'll hit it with the gloss coat, or just more of this. And yeah, that's it. I think next time I'll cover masking off, you know, all the yellow areas, and then start in the blue. I could hand brush the blue a lot quicker and easier, but I want a very consistent gradient across the figure. So if I did all the work to put the gradient in on the yellow, and then I just come in with a flat color blue, or if I try to brush in some shadows to the blue, it's never going to look as good. It's not going to blend together on the whole figure. So I try to airbrush as much as possible, and then hand brush any finer details that don't need a lot of shadowing. And just as a sneak peek, here's some of those metal Wolverine claws that I made. That video on Instagram was not real. I didn't think so many people would think it was real, but nope, they're not that sharp. They're sharp on the tip, but they're not that sharp. But I think these turned out really well. You can't see it there, but I sculpted in all the little lines in the grids. I got to clean these up a bit. The casts weren't that clean, so I got to go in and clean out some of the flashing and gunk from dremeling and installing all these things, but I think those turned out pretty cool. I'll let everyone know when I will be back next time. All right, thanks again. Bye.